Welcome to Campfire Horror Tales. Pull up a seat by the fire and get ready to hear a true story. Tonight, I'll share a true highway ghost horror story about the lonely stretch of Highway 191 and the mysterious Lady in White. This chilling tale is full of ghostly encounters, the endless desert night, and unexplained events that leave drivers terrified. The real horror begins right now. Highway 191 cut through the desert like a black ribbon under the cold moonlight. Locals whispered about it, sharing stories at gas stations and truck stops. Ghosts, shadows of the past, and the woman in white. They all belong to the legends of this lonely stretch of asphalt. Few dared drive it at night, and those who did sometimes returned, changed, haunted by sights and sounds they couldn't explain. Jack Hanlon had heard the stories all his life. The bride who vanished on her wedding night, doomed to walk the highway forever, appearing to drivers alone. The vanishing hitchhiker, silent and pale, who sometimes rode inside trucks before disappearing without a trace. Jack didn't believe in ghosts. He measured time in miles, deadlines, and engine hums, not in shadows. But the highway had a presence, heavier than asphalt and wind, impossible to ignore. Some tales were gruesome. A trucker named Pete picked up a woman on a cold autumn night. She rode silently, dress shimmering in the headlights, until she vanished. Later, his cargo was found scattered in a perfect circle along the asphalt. Pete never spoke of it again, but the story lingered. Highway 191 was alive, the locals said. It watched, tested, and punished those who underestimated it. Alone at night, the road played with minds, with senses, with memories. A faint shadow here, a whisper on the CB there. Subtle, yet unnerving. The consequences for ignoring the signs were absolute. Disappearances, madness, or worse. The feeling that the night would never end. Jack didn't plan to test the highway's patience. He was a long-haul trucker, used to solitary nights and endless miles. Yet as he rolled his rig along the dark asphalt, the desert stretched around him like an ocean, empty and silent, pressing against his chest, his head, every nerve. A shiver ran down his spine. A shadow lingered too long at the edge of his headlights. The wind whispered in a way that made him glance over his shoulder. He forced himself to focus on the road ahead, but doubt had taken root. The legends of Highway 191 weren't just stories. Somewhere out there, waiting in the dark, the highway remembered every driver who dared it. And it always waited for the next one. Jack Hanlon had spent most of his life on the road. 30 years behind the wheel of 18-wheelers had carved him into a creature of asphalt and diesel. The kind of man who measured time not in calendars, but in mile markers and way stations. His body carried the weight of it. Shoulders stiff, knuckles swollen from decades of gripping the wheel. Eyes narrowed from too many nights staring through rain-streaked windshields into the void. But for all of it, he kept driving. He told himself it was because of the money, though that wasn't true. Trucking never made a man rich, only kept the lights on and the fridge stocked. The truth was simpler. Jack had nowhere else to be. The road, with all its miles of silence, suited him better than any town or house ever could. People asked questions. The road never did. That night, he was running late. The dispatcher had called earlier, voice tight with urgency. A rush order, cargo that needed to make it from Phoenix to Salt Lake before morning. Jack didn't ask what was in the trailer. He never asked. Freight was freight, and deadlines were the only gods his profession knew. He fueled up at a nearly empty station, drank a cup of coffee that tasted like burned rubber, and pulled back onto Highway 191, just as the last smear of daylight vanished behind the desert horizon. The cab filled with the low, constant hum of the engine, a sound as familiar as breathing. Jack kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the stick shift, the way he always did. The dashboard clock glowed faintly in the dark, numbers ticking forward with sluggish precision. Out the windshield, the world was nothing but two narrow lanes of blacktop, and the desolation of the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. The farther north he drove, the thinner the world seemed to become. Town lights disappeared behind him until there was nothing left but shadow and starlight. The desert floor rolled away into black silence, broken only by the pale ribs of dead cactus and the jagged silhouettes of distant mesas. It was the kind of landscape that made a man feel smaller than he thought possible. Out there, under the weight of 1,000 cold stars, even the growl of a diesel engine sounded fragile. Jack's eyelids grew heavy. He fought the urge to rub his eyes, knowing too well how fatigue could lure a man into mistakes. He clicked on the radio, hoping for company, but the speakers offered nothing but static. He twisted the dial slowly, hunting for a voice, for music, for anything. Snatches of sound flickered in and out. An old country song here, a burst of talk radio there. But none of it stayed. The desert swallowed it whole. Somewhere between Holbrook and the nothingness beyond, the CB crackled. A faint whisper threaded through the static, too faint to catch, like a voice half drowned in water. Jack leaned forward, brow furrowed, waiting for words to take shape. But the sound died, leaving only silence behind. He let out a sharp breath and shook his head. Desert interference. Nothing more. He thought about the stories. Every truck stop had them, traded back and forth like cigarettes, growing wilder with each telling. The woman in white, the ghost of the bride, the hitchhiker who vanished from the passenger seat when you weren't looking. Jack had heard them all, laughed at most, dismissed the rest. He wasn't the kind of man who spooked easy. The road was dangerous enough without layering fairy tales over it. And yet, as the miles stretched on, he felt the weight of the silence press harder. The desert seemed alive in its stillness, the stars unblinking, the shadows at the edges of the headlights too thick, too deep. The hum of the tires over asphalt became hypnotic, a steady drone that pulled at the edges of his awareness. He sipped from his thermos, the coffee long gone cold, and told himself he was fine. Just a job. Just another night. But the road had a way of stripping a man down. Out there in the endless dark, every mile wore on him like sandpaper. Every mile brought him closer to the place where stories took root. The CB whispered again, sharper this time. Not words, but tones, like the faint echo of a woman's laugh buried deep in static. Jack's grip tightened on the wheel, his pulse quickening before he could stop it. He reached for the dial, turned it down until the cab filled only with the growl of the engine. His reflection stared back at him in the windshield, pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. "You're tired," he muttered under his breath. But the desert didn't answer. It never did. The road stretched on, black and unbroken, into a future he could neither see nor name. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of his headlights, something waited. And whether he believed in it or not, Highway 191 would have its due. The desert night was absolute. Jack's headlights carved two pale tunnels through the dark, the beams ending abruptly in a wall of emptiness, as if the world beyond them had ceased to exist. The road was straight, impossibly so, stretching forward like a taut string, with no bends, no curves, no sign of another vehicle. It was the kind of solitude that gnawed at the edges of reason, that made a man start to wonder if he was the last living soul on earth. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, knuckles whitening, and told himself he had done this countless times before. But tonight, the silence carried a different weight, a density that filled the cab and pressed against his chest. Even the hum of the tires sounded wrong. Thicker, deeper, as though the asphalt itself had grown heavier under him. Somewhere behind him, a shadow flickered in the mirrors. Jack glanced up, quick, trained to catch hazards before they caught him. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw headlights, distant, faint. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Just the hollow blackness, the desert stretching endlessly. Unbroken. He rubbed his eyes. Fatigue, he thought. It played tricks. Long hauls in the dead of night could make a man see things. That was all. But then came the sound. A faint tick, 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 like pebbles striking metal. At first he thought it was road debris, but the rhythm was too precise. He turned off the radio, already low, and listened. The sound came from the passenger's side. A light tapping against the window, though there was nothing outside but rushing air and darkness. Jack's throat went dry. He kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched, refusing to look at the glass. The tapping ceased as suddenly as it began, leaving only the engine's growl. He drove on. The clock on the dashboard told him it was nearing midnight. The miles passed slower now, each one stretching into the next, unspooling into eternity. His eyelids drooped, his head sagged forward. and then a shape caught in the corner of his vision. On the shoulder, illuminated by a brief sweep of the headlights, something stood. He jerked upright, hands tightening on the wheel. It had been a figure, slender, unmoving, pale against the backdrop of the desert. He saw no features, only the impression of white fabric drifting in the breeze. His heart hammered as he leaned forward, peering into the side mirror. Nothing. The shoulder was empty. Jack swallowed hard, a bitter taste rising in his mouth. He told himself it was a trick of the light, the mind conjuring shapes where none existed. Shadows had a way of wearing familiar faces when a man was tired. That was all it was. Still, unease prickled at the back of his neck, the hairs rising as though an unseen hand had brushed them. He reached for his thermos, sipped the dregs of cold coffee, and forced his focus back on the road. For a while, the desert gave him nothing more. Just the endless stretch of blacktop, the star-smeared sky above, the quiet hum of the engine. The moment faded, became memory. But unease lingered, refusing to let go. And then it happened again. Far ahead, just at the edge of the headlights, he saw her. This time there was no mistaking it. A woman stood on the shoulder, facing the road, her dress long and pale, almost luminous in the dark. She didn't move. She didn't raise her arm. She simply stood there, as though waiting. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The truck roared past, the figure swallowed by darkness, but the image burned in his vision. He checked the mirror, desperate for confirmation. Empty. The road behind him was bare. Cold sweat prickled his forehead. The stories came back in a rush, whispered warnings traded over truck stop counters. The woman in white. She waits. He had dismissed them all as folklore, but now the legend had form, had weight, had eyes that seemed to follow him even though she was no longer there. He gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles aching. His pulse thundered in his ears. The CB crackled. Static first, then a faint voice, so soft he almost missed it. Words slurred by distortion, but he caught fragments. A woman's tone, high and fragile, whispering something he couldn't quite understand. He reached out, hand trembling, and shut it off. The silence afterward was deafening. Jack forced a laugh, hollow and strained, the sound unnatural in the cab's emptiness. He muttered to himself about fatigue, about shadows and tricks of the night. But deep down, a part of him knew. The desert was watching. And she was out there, waiting. The highway had become a tunnel of monotony, a ribbon of black that pulled Jack deeper into its throat with each passing mile. His eyelids grew heavy, though fear had sharpened his nerves to a knife's edge. He kept telling himself to focus on the road, to keep his mind busy. But the silence pressed harder, filling the cab until he could almost hear the beat of his own pulse in it. When he saw her again, there was no doubt. She stood farther up the road this time, not on the shoulder, but directly in the beam of his headlights. Her figure emerged slowly from the darkness, as if the desert itself was shaping her from shadow and bone. The dress was white, long enough to brush the dust at her feet, the fabric shimmering faintly in the harsh glare. Her head was lowered, strands of black hair falling loose, obscuring her face. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. He told himself not to slow, not to swerve, not to acknowledge. But his foot betrayed him. Pressure lifted from the accelerator, the truck's roar dwindling to a growl, then to a hum. His rig lumbered forward, closer, closer, until she filled the windshield. She didn't move, didn't flinch. The headlights washed over her, and for one impossible second, she seemed both solid and insubstantial, like a figure made of mist wrapped in fabric. The reflection glimmered in her eyes that were not downcast as he thought, but fixed directly on him, wide, unblinking, bottomless. Jack's stomach lurched. Instinct screamed to keep going, to barrel past her, to let the desert reclaim whatever phantom it had birthed. But his hand moved of its own accord, flicking the turn signal, guiding the rig toward the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as the truck slowed to a stop. The engine idled, a low growl in the stillness. She remained in the glow of the headlights, motionless, a pale sentinel on the edge of the night. Jack sat frozen, one hand locked around the wheel, the other hovering over the gear shift. He tried to form words, an order to himself, a denial, anything. But his throat tightened, strangled by silence. The desert outside was utterly still, the air so dry it seemed brittle. Then she moved. Not a step, not a sway. She simply appeared closer, as though the darkness had folded inward and placed her beside the cab. Jack's breath caught, his pulse slamming against his ribs. He hadn't seen her walk. She had not crossed the distance. She was just there. The passenger door creaked. Slowly, it swung open, though Jack hadn't touched the locks. The dome light flickered, casting a weak glow over the seat beside him. For a long, terrible heartbeat, nothing filled the space. Then the air shifted. A weight pressed into the seat. The faint rustle of fabric, the chill of cold air. She was inside. Jack turned his head against every screaming instinct. The woman sat rigid, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her dress was old-fashioned, lace frayed at the cuffs, the fabric damp as if soaked in something dark. Her skin was pale, not merely pale, but almost translucent, the veins like faint blue threads beneath the surface. Her hair clung wetly to her temples, strands plastered against her cheek. And her eyes, God, her eyes, were hollow things, endless pits that reflected nothing. She did not speak. She did not breathe. The smell reached him then, faint but undeniable. Damp earth, mildew, the sour tang of old metal like rusted iron long buried. Jack swallowed hard, his throat raw, fingers clenching the wheel until his nails dug into the leather. He wanted to shout, to demand she leave, but his voice withered before it left his chest. The desert around him seemed to lean closer, pressing its silence into the cab. She turned her head slowly, deliberately, the motion creaking like old wood. Her gaze fixed on him, piercing, heavy, as though she were weighing his very soul. Jack forced himself to look forward, to stare at the endless ribbon of highway. He shifted the rig into gear, his hands trembling, and pressed the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, back onto the asphalt, its roar breaking the desert's silence. The road stretched ahead, unbroken, but something had changed. The lines on the pavement shimmered, blurring into strange shapes before snapping back into place. The desert felt closer now, as if the darkness pressed against the glass. And beside him, unmoving, the woman rode. The CB crackled, not static this time, but a voice, faint and distorted, speaking words he could not comprehend. Jack reached for the dial, desperate to shut it off again, but froze when he realized the voice wasn't coming from the radio at all. It was coming from her. Her lips did not move, but the sound filled the cab, soft and cold, like whispers rising from beneath the earth. Jack's heart pounded. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the rig rattling, the engine straining, as though he could outrun her presence. But the road only stretched further, endless, devouring every mile he laid behind him. And still, she sat beside him, silent, waiting. The highway stretched ahead, a single black vein pulsing through the desert. Jack clung to the wheel as if it were the only anchor left in reality. The woman sat beside him, motionless, her presence heavier than the truck itself. Every nerve in his body screamed to look at her, to confirm she was real or unreal. But he didn't dare. He fixed his gaze on the endless road, convinced that if he gave her a fraction of his attention, something would break inside him. The miles rolled beneath the tires, but the desert never changed. The same low scrub, the same twisted mesquite trees, the same pale stones half buried in sand. The horizon refused to shift. The moon had risen higher now, cold and colorless, but it only illuminated the repetition. Jack frowned. He knew this stretch. He had passed it before. The odd boulder shaped like a skull, the rusted road sign leaning at an angle, the flattened jackrabbit bleaching in the heat. He had seen them all, half an hour ago. A coil of dread tightened in his chest. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the rig thundering forward, shaking with effort. But minutes later, the same landmarks returned. The skull-shaped boulder, the leaning sign, the jackrabbit. The desert was looping. His throat dried, his tongue thick as chalk. He dared a glance at the woman. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still folded, her dress heavy with invisible damp. her eyes fixed on something far beyond the windshield. Yet her lips parted slightly, as though the faintest breath escaped. Though no sound came, Jack tore his gaze away, staring harder at the road. The CB sputtered again. Not static, laughter. Faint, hollow, rising from deep within the speakers, like children laughing inside a tunnel. He reached for the knob, his fingers trembling, but the volume wouldn't change. The dial spun freely, broken, useless. The laughter grew, overlapping, echoing until it became a chorus. He slammed his fist against the radio. It went dead. The silence afterward was worse. The woman's head turned. Slowly, without hurry, her neck creaked as her gaze slid toward him. Jack's chest locked, his breath snagged. He refused to meet her eyes. He kept his stare pinned to the center line of the highway. The yellow paint shimmered, the stripes bent, curling into impossible shapes, bending into circles that spiraled and broke apart. His headlights flickered, stuttering, plunging the cab into darkness for split seconds at a time. Each time the lights returned, the road looked slightly different. Narrower, cracked, unfamiliar. Then he saw it. A green highway sign loomed on the right, its reflective letters catching the glare. Mile 66. Jack's hands twitched. He'd passed that marker 2 hours ago. The truck barreled past. Another sign appeared. Mile 66. Then another. Mile 66. Jack's mouth went dry. He whispered the number to himself, as if saying it would break the pattern. But the desert swallowed the word whole. The woman beside him did not move. But in the corner of his vision, he saw her mouth curl upward, not into a smile, but into something colder, hungrier. The air inside the cab grew heavy, pressing down like deep water. Jack's ears popped, his head throbbing. His vision blurred at the edges, the world narrowing to the faint glow of headlights and the endless repetition of signs. Something darted across the road. A shape low to the ground, fast, too quick to identify. Jack swerved, the tires screaming against asphalt, the trailer lurching dangerously. The woman didn't flinch. Not a single hair on her damp head shifted. Jack's heart hammered. He pulled the rig straight again, sweat beading down his back. The steering wheel felt slick under his palms. The desert was no longer silent. He heard whispers, not from the radio, not from the woman, but from outside. A chorus of voices carried on the dry wind, threading through the cracks in the windows, seeping into the cab. The words were unintelligible, overlapping, tumbling over one another in a language not meant for him. Yet he understood the intent. They were calling to him, urging him forward, deeper. The headlights flickered again. This time when they returned, the pavement was different. Broken, cracked, The center line had vanished. The road was now a pale dirt track, carved through the desert like a scar. Jack's stomach twisted. He hadn't turned off. He hadn't left the asphalt. But here he was, the truck's wheels grinding over dust and gravel. He slammed the brakes. The rig shuddered, metal groaning, lights bouncing wildly. The truck screeched to a halt in a cloud of choking dust. Silence. The woman sat perfectly still, her head tilted slightly as though curious, as though she'd been waiting for him to stop. Jack's chest heaved. His fingers ached from clutching the wheel. He tried to breathe, to steady himself, but every breath drew in more of that damp, metallic scent that clung to her. Outside the windshield, the desert was wrong. The moon hung too low, swollen and yellow. The stars had shifted, rearranged into constellations he didn't recognize. The scrub and stones leaned inward, as if the land itself had bent toward the truck. And on the dirt road ahead, something glowed faintly. A pale shimmer, distant but pulsing, like a lantern swaying in the dark. The woman's hands uncurled. For the first time, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand and pointed forward, toward the light. Jack's stomach dropped. His instincts screamed to turn the rig around, to drive until his tires shredded, to escape. But the road behind him was gone. Only desert stretched there, unbroken, endless. There was no way back, only forward. The pale shimmer hovered ahead. A trembling orb suspended just above the dirt road. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, casting a weak glow that barely touched the surrounding desert. Yet Jack's eyes were drawn to it, magnetized, unable to look away. The woman's finger remained raised, her damp hand pale and rigid, pointing him toward the glow. She did not move, did not speak, but her intention was clear. Jack's grip on the wheel tightened until his joints ached. The cab seemed to shrink around him, the air heavy and close. He felt trapped inside his own truck, a rat in a steel cage rolling towards something it could not escape. For a long moment, he considered shutting off the engine, climbing down, and leaving it all behind. Truck, road, everything. But when his gaze flicked to the desert around him, he knew he would not survive a single step. The land was wrong. The mesquite trees leaned inward, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal arms. The rocks jutted from the earth at strange angles, like tombstones tilting under an unseen weight. And the silence, absolute crushing, made his ears ring with its absence. The light pulsed again, brighter now, beckoning. Jack pressed his foot against the accelerator. Slowly, reluctantly, the rig rolled forward, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Each yard he gained felt like a descent deeper into something that wanted him. The CB radio sputtered to life once more. This time, it wasn't laughter, nor whispers. It was breathing, slow, labored, drawn out, like lungs pulling air through water. The sound filled the cab, wet and suffocating, Jack reached out to rip the cord from the unit, but his hand froze an inch away, as if the air itself resisted. His chest tightened, his throat closing around the same drowning breath. He yanked his hand back, forcing his eyes on the glow ahead. The dirt road narrowed, the truck's headlights falling short, swallowed by the surrounding dark. The pale orb grew larger, its rhythm faster, until Jack realized it wasn't light at all. It was fire. A lantern hung from a crooked post, its glass fogged, the flame inside guttering as though smothered by unseen fingers. But even from a distance, he could see the soot-black stains creeping up the wood of the post, as though the lantern had burned there for centuries. The woman beside him shifted. The sound was subtle, a whisper of fabric, but in the suffocating silence it cracked like thunder. Jack felt her gaze press against him. Against every instinct, he turned. Her eyes were no longer fixed on the horizon. They were locked on him. Wide, unblinking, their whites clouded, their pupils dark wells that swallowed light. Her lips moved. At first, no sound came. Then, faintly like wind, threading through broken glass, he heard her whisper, "Keep going." The words slithered down his spine, and before he realized, his foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck roared forward, barreling down the narrow dirt path toward the lantern. The flame flared, suddenly bright, illuminating more than the road. For a fleeting instant, Jack saw figures standing among the desert scrub. Dozens of them. Pale shapes in tattered clothing, their heads bowed, their arms dangling lifeless at their sides. They faced the truck, but did not move, did not breathe. Their eyes caught the light, glinting hollow sockets where something should have been. Jack's stomach heaved. He tore his gaze forward again, sweat blinding him, knuckles white on the wheel. The rig thundered closer. The lantern swung wildly on its crooked post, as though shaken by invisible hands. The ground beneath the truck trembled. Jack felt the vibration through the pedals, a low groan rising from the earth itself. The orb of fire burst. The lantern shattered in a rain of sparks, the post collapsing into ash. But the light did not vanish. It spread. Flames licked across the desert floor, glowing lines racing outward in impossible patterns, twisting into circles and spirals that seared themselves into the dirt. A vast symbol burned beneath his wheels, ancient and writhing, its meaning older than language. The voices returned, no longer whispers, but a roar. 1,000 throats chanting in unison, a guttural song that rattled the glass of the windshield. Jack covered his ears, but the sound vibrated inside his skull, shaking his teeth, tearing at his sanity. The woman beside him leaned closer. Her skin brushed his arm, clammy, ice cold, and the weight of her presence pressed him deeper into his seat. Her voice came again, clearer now. "You can't leave." Jack's vision blurred. The desert beyond the windshield dissolved into smoke and fire. The road disintegrated, replaced by a churning pit of shadows. Figures moved within it, faces contorted in screams, hands clawing upward from the void, their fingers curling like hooks. The truck groaned. Metal screamed as though dragged downward by unseen chains. Jack fought the wheel, slamming his foot on the gas, but the tires spun uselessly in the burning dirt. The rig shuddered, its lights flickering, its horn blaring one long, mournful cry into the night. The woman smiled. Not kind, not human, but a stretch of lips revealing teeth too sharp, too many. Her eyes gleamed with reflected fire, ancient and hungry. And then, as the truck lurched forward, plunging nose first toward the abyss, the flames collapsed. Darkness swallowed everything. Jack's body jerked against the seatbelt. The engine sputtered. When his eyes adjusted, he saw asphalt beneath him once again. Smooth, black, familiar highway. The desert lay calm and flat on either side, the moon still cold and distant above. The woman was gone. Only the driver's seat and the empty road remained. But the smell lingered. Damp fabric, rust, and something deeper, like grave soil turned fresh. Jack's hands shook. The mile marker ahead gleamed in the headlights. Mile 66. Jack's hands remained rigid on the wheel, trembling as the rig rolled forward. The highway stretched flat before him, smooth and uninterrupted, the desert calm and ordinary. For a heartbeat, he allowed himself to believe he had escaped. The woman had vanished. The flames had collapsed. The ancient symbols were gone. Only the black asphalt, the faint stars, and the whispering wind remained. Relief should have come. But it didn't. The mile markers blinked ahead, familiar yet terrifying. 66. Jack's throat went dry. He remembered them, over and over, earlier in the night, each marker repeating a cruel loop of the road. He gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles cracked. There was no way this was the same stretch of highway. He knew the desert too well, had driven these miles countless times. Yet the repetition refused to be ignored. A wind kicked up suddenly, scattering dust across the cab and rattling the windows. The CB radio hissed, static at first, then whispering voices threading through the interference. They spoke in the faintest murmurs, impossible to understand. Yet their intent was clear. They were calling him, urging him forward, pulling him deeper. Jack slammed his hand on the dial, trying to cut it off. But the static persisted. The voices overlapped, rising in intensity, and with each surge, he felt the cab grow colder, heavier. A coldness seeped into his bones, climbing up through the seat belt, twisting his spine. He glanced at the passenger seat. It was empty. The woman had disappeared. For now. But the air had changed. A subtle weight pressed down, like unseen eyes watching from every angle. Jack's mind screamed that he should stop, turn around, abandon the truck, and run. But even as the thought crossed his mind, the landscape beyond the windshield betrayed him. The desert ahead shifted subtly, unnaturally. Rocks and scrub appeared where there had been none. Shadows stretched in impossible directions. The horizon warped. He drove on. The road twisted now, though it shouldn't have. It curved slightly, yet no turn had been taken, no deviation in his path. Every bend, every shadow, every glimmer of moonlight seemed calculated, as though the desert itself conspired against him. Jack's breathing quickened. The truck rattled and groaned under him, tires grinding over the asphalt. Yet the sensation was all wrong. The engine's growl sounded distant, muffled, as though he were underwater. The cab felt hollow. He checked the mirrors, empty desert behind him, stretching endlessly. But the repetition gnawed at him. He had passed this exact bend, these exact stones, this exact jackrabbit weeks ago. Or was it hours? The lines of time had lost all meaning. Then, movement. On the shoulder, faint, almost imperceptible, she appeared. The woman in white. Her dress shimmered in the headlights, damp and clinging. Her head was down, hair obscuring her face. She did not wave, did not beckon. She simply stood there, waiting. Jack's stomach convulsed. Every instinct screamed to drive past, to accelerate, to put as much distance between them as possible. Yet his foot froze, as though the road itself resisted motion. The CB crackled again. A voice, unmistakable, this time distinct. A whisper of his own name, carried across static and desert air. Jack. He clenched the wheel, chest tight. The pulse in his ears thundered louder than the engine. The desert had trapped him. He was no longer traveling forward. He was moving in circles, in loops, deeper into the same nightmare. The woman lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met his, wide, unblinking pits of darkness that reflected the stars like distant voids. He felt himself drawn into them, as if the light of the desert could not penetrate, could not protect him from whatever lay behind those eyes. Jack's mind teetered. Every mile marker repeated, every rock, every twisted mesquite tree. The desert had folded in on itself. Time had no meaning. The road ahead promised nothing but continuation, yet every instinct told him he would never reach its end. The wind howled suddenly, rattling the cab, carrying with it the faint smell of damp earth and rust, the same smell that had clung to her when she first appeared. Jack swallowed hard, mouth dry, throat raw. He could no longer tell if he was awake or trapped inside some fevered dream. And then, faintly, from beyond the windshield, he saw the shimmer again. Lantern light, hovering, pulsing, beckoning. The road stretched ahead, unbroken, eternal. Behind him, the desert waited silently. Beside him, the passenger seat remained empty. For now, Jack pressed harder on the accelerator, heart hammering. There was nowhere else to go. The highway had him. And he knew, deep down, it would never let him go. The desert stretched before him like a frozen ocean, black and infinite. Jack's hands shook on the wheel, sweat slicking his palms, but the accelerator refused to obey the trembling of his will. The road had become something else, no longer asphalt, no longer tangible, but a living extension of the desert itself. Every mile he passed repeated the last, each turn and shadow echoing backward and forward, overlapping in a disorienting, endless loop. The moon hung low, unnaturally swollen, casting silver light that warped and twisted across the cracked asphalt. Stars shifted, constellations rearranged themselves into alien patterns. Jack blinked, rubbed his eyes, and the vision remained. The world outside the cab no longer obeyed reason. And then she appeared. The woman in white. Not on the shoulder this time, not in the distance. She was inside the cab. Just as she had been before, but now closer, her shoulder brushing his as he gripped the wheel. Her eyes were bottomless wells, reflecting the stars in ways that made the desert itself seem hollow. Jack's breath came fast, ragged. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears, drowning out the growl of the engine. His fingers dug into the steering wheel until his nails broke through the skin, until the leather was slick with blood. Yet she remained, patient, serene, like a shadow carved from time itself. The cab groaned. The dashboard lights flickered. Outside, the desert bent and cracked, stretching into impossible shapes. Every familiar landmark twisted into grotesque forms. The skull-shaped boulder stretched like a grin. The leaning road sign arched over the road like a gaping jaw. The jackrabbit he had passed earlier, or had it been hours, days, was still there, skeletal and grinning in the dim light. A whisper crawled across the cab, threading through his mind, cold and intimate. You belong to the road now. Jack's pulse spiked. He tried to look away, tried to force his eyes back on the asphalt. But the cab tilted slightly, as though gravity had shifted. The truck itself was alive, writhing beneath him. Tires squealed, the engine screamed. Yet the road did not change. It continued forward, unbroken, unyielding, eternal. He glanced in the passenger mirror. She leaned slightly closer, her lips parting. Yet no words emerged. But the sound filled him anyway. A chorus of faint screams echoing from somewhere beneath the cab. From the dirt beneath the highway, rising from the desert like the breath of the dead. Jack yanked the wheel, swerving violently, but the road did not bend. The horizon remained unchanged. Every attempt to escape was swallowed, erased. He had driven in loops for hours, days, perhaps years, though time no longer had meaning. The woman in white simply watched, patient and unyielding. The CB crackled one last time. Static first, then clear, familiar, dripping with something ancient. Welcome back, Jack. It was not a greeting. It was a statement of ownership. The lantern light shimmered ahead, faint, pulsing, beckoning. Jack felt the pull like a weight in his chest, dragging him forward. He slammed the accelerator, the rig lurching violently over the warped road, tires squealing, the cab shaking like it would tear apart. The light grew, hovering above the ground, drawing him closer. And then the desert shifted again. The horizon swallowed itself. The moon fell to black, and the stars blinked out one by one. Jack's vision tunneled. The road beneath the tires seemed to dissolve, revealing a bottomless void. The engine roared, the tires spun, and the truck tilted, tilting, as though sliding into the abyss. The woman in white leaned closer, her face inches from his, cold and wet, her eyes reflecting infinity. Jack could feel her breath on his cheek, the weight of her presence pressing him deeper into the seat. He wanted to scream, to resist, to fight. But his voice was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Then she smiled. Not a human smile. Something wider. Something that stretched beyond the limits of flesh, revealing teeth that glinted in the void. And with that smile, the cab lurched forward, falling, spinning, into the endless highway. Jack's body thrashed. His vision shattered into fragments of light and shadow, every memory, every mile, every moment folding over itself. The road became a spiral, the desert a cage, the night eternal. And just as he thought he could not endure another second, the world snapped back. The cab was still, the tires still. The desert stretched flat before him. The mile marker ahead read 66. Jack's eyes widened. He tried to scream, but the sound did not come. The woman in white sat beside him, motionless, waiting. The road stretched on, unbroken, infinite. The night was endless, and Jack knew, with bone-deep certainty, that he would never leave Highway 191. He would drive forever, and she would always be there,